Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm your host for this episode, and we're recording a few days after Manchester United drew 3-3 out in Turkey with Galatasaray in the Champions League, and my colleague Samuel Luckhurst was in Istanbul. Samuel, before we get into the football talk, what was more stressful, getting into the game on Wednesday night or your journey to the office this morning?
It would still be the Istanbul journey.
That's so statement.
It was pretty unpleasant with the rain and the traffic, and then there were police escorts for United's coach, a police escort for Galatasaray's coaches, and then there were also police escorts for the buses of United fans. At that point, a lot of very irascible Turks got out of their cars and started angrily confronting the traffic officers there, who literally just stopped traffic on the turn-off going onto a motorway. So it was carnage outside the stadium. 6 of us ended up bailing on the motorway and hurdled a fence to make to walk the last 10 minutes or so. And of course, that meant we had to walk through the sprawling contingent of Galatasaray fans who had amassed outside the Rams Park Stadium. Fortunately,
I was going to say no
trouble at all, no mither. There were a couple of questions, like in English as well. Manchester United fan was like, no journalists. In fairness, we looked like journalists. We all had our bags with us, and we didn't have. It's not like we had We didn't have Stone Island jumpers and Adidas Originals on or anything like that. So I think they took us at face value when we said that.
I mean, you had an angry receptionist just on your back as well, leading into the podcast studio. So you could probably apply those comments to our morning, the 10 minutes we've just had before we recorded. Anyways, the game, obviously 3-3, an incredibly disappointing result, but it looked really good. I mean, 20 minutes into the game, Garnacho scores a brilliant goal, rifles it into the net. Fernandes, what a strike that was as well. You're thinking, hang on a minute, this is Manchester United. They've arrived, they're playing well, they're going to sail through the game and throw away.
Yeah, the journey from hell to hell and to cover a hell of a game, it was extraordinary, especially the last 20 minutes, just how back and forth it was. And it felt like United had their best chances all evening in that spell. And so much happened. Obviously, we'll get onto the goalkeeper, but some of the in-game management was questionable, taking Garnacho off, and then Pellistri, who came on, and he was a logical player to bring on. But he had all those chances, and you think if Garnacho had one of those chances, maybe he'd have got the goal. And then when it did end, I mean, the other extraordinary thing is that for all this, we're going to clamp down on time wasting, and we're going to put a lot of added time on. There was only 2 minutes in the first half, 3 minutes in the second half, and it was actually one of those games where you wanted minimum of 5 minutes of added time, maybe.
I don't think anyone wanted it to stop, to be fair. It was
it was such an absorbing game, and maybe if it did go on for 5 more minutes, perhaps United would have got that goal. But unfortunately for them, it's history repeats itself. At 2-0, we were all thinking, okay, this is going really well, but we have seen them squander a 2-goal lead away from home in Europe recently, and it happened again. And afterwards, clearly, the fall guy of the fallout is Onana, and there are no two ways about it. He did cost them, and it's strange watching United at the moment, because in the Premier League, they're quite uninspiring. The majority of the games recently, not so much the Everton one, have been a bit of a chore to cover. The Luton win was turgid, and there've been some last-minute wins. They've been functional, they've been efficient, and through that, they're in a reasonably decent position. They're sixth and only 2 points off Tottenham, somehow 6 points off first. In the Champions League, it's chaotic, it's kamikaze football, 12 goals scored, 14 goals conceded. It's by far and away the most enthralling group stage they've been involved in since the treble win season. And like that season, it's going to come down like that group stage in that season, it's going to come down to a final home game against Bayern Munich, where if they do finish runners up to Bayern Munich, that's the desired result. But that night it was a 1-1 draw, and obviously 1-1 will not do in a couple of weeks' time.
It's incredible when you look at the Champions League group. I mean, United have scored 12 goals. The top scorers in the group, more than Bayern.
Oh, they scored more than Bayern?
More than Bayern. Bayern Munich has scored 11, and they're bottom with 4 points, which is just remarkable. And I mean, they scored 3 against Bayern, Copenhagen, Galatasaray, and yet they've not won one of those games. Look, I think we'll have to really get into Andrew Onana, as you've just said, because it almost feels harsh to lay responsibility solely at his door. There were still chances to win the game, but elite sport, it's hard enough to win without your goalkeeper committing absolute howlers. And those free kicks, any goalkeeper worth the salt, it just doesn't go in. The first one, he kind of commits, doesn't he? Takes a step and he gambles and it goes in. The second one, that's a mess. From a technical point of view, I don't know what he's doing with his hands. It's really, really poor. And we've saw examples of Onana struggling in the Champions League, struggling in the Premier League. I actually thought he turned a corner in recent weeks and he looked better, didn't he? But that was a regression again, and a really bad one.
Oh yeah, and it's by far and away his worst night yet in United colours. People at the club made a big thing of, after the Bayern Munich game, he announced in the dressing room that he was going out there to speak to the media after his howler from the Leroy Sané shot. And he didn't do that on Wednesday evening when he left the mix zone. One of the club officials was walking out with him with their arm draped around his shoulder, and that's maybe the treatment he's going to need after all the column inches that have been dedicated to him in the last 24 hours or so. But as I said, he is the fall guy because his goalkeeping was suspect, to put it mildly, I think for every goal. Even that third goal, when it went in, I thought, how the hell's that gone in? I mean, fair enough, it was a terrific strike, and I forget the pronunciation of his name, but he was brilliant in the first game at Old Trafford. He was so influential. Akitoglu, Karim is his first name, I think it is. But when I noticed he was on the bench, I thought, I don't know why he's on the bench. And Tanguy Ndombele got a hell of a lot of stick when he was brought off, which suggested that there was surprise that he actually started. I think that was one of the questions from the Turkish media afterwards as to why Ndombele did start the game. But that third goal, that can't go in from there. His position's not good enough. He's not guarding his near post. The second free kick is, you're thinking, like, as soon as it goes in, you think, my goodness, that is probably worse than the Sané one. There have been times when Onana's made saves this season where Rich and I have discussed it, where his technique does seem strange, that when he saves a shot, he almost always tries to get as flush a palm on it as possible. Now, the best goalkeepers, they know how exactly you've got to glove a ball away, whether it's a fingertip, whether you do need to hit it flush, or how to divert it away because there might be a chance of the rebound. There have been some saves that Onana's made where, but for a teammate coming in, I think it happened at Sheffield United and Fulham, there would have been an opportunity on the rebound because he's got too much purchase on the contact with the ball. And what he was, before Galatasaray scored the other night, he'd made some, I thought he looked quite haphazard. He wasn't particularly calm or assured. It wasn't like you were thinking, he's having a secure evening here. And that second goal, watching it back, I think there's no, it's a really poor mistake anyway, whatever any nuance to the goal. But watching it back, there isn't a single Galatasaray player who gets near the ball. And okay, the trajectory that Ziyech has put in it's inviting. I think it's Marshall who makes an attempted intervention. He goes for the header, but still, I don't think that can account for the goalkeeping. And not just the goalkeeping of letting it in, but he tries to, was it scoop or even shovel the ball out?
From a technical standpoint,
he did try and catch it, and it was a catchable cross. It wasn't a shot from Ziyech. And what Ten Hag said afterwards, where he gushed about Ziyech because obviously he coached him at Ajax and he very briefly would have liked him at United. He preferred to focus on that, but Ziyech's technique, these free kicks were eminently savable. They were pretty harmless. The first one included, where I don't think Ten Hag said Ziyech isn't extraordinary, but it wasn't an extraordinary free kick. Onana just somehow got wrong-footed by it, but looking at it at the time even, and again, it was one of those games where our monitor wasn't working, but fortunately, sometimes when you're so fixed on a game, you can appreciate the brilliance or the dreadfulness of something. And as soon as these goals went in, I don't think anybody was quibbling over, was that a goalkeeping error or not? It clearly was, whether it was the first goal or the third goal. The second one, it's one of the worst mistakes I think I've ever seen by a United keeper.
It's got a lot to do with confidence. I think he was high on confidence last season, and I actually looked at the numbers from Inter Milan's campaign. Onana conceded just 36 goals in all competitions last season. And at this stage, at this point, and we're already in December, 1st December day, he's conceded 33. So the entire season, 36, and now he's conceded 33. To be fair, I don't think he played the entire season. I think he was on the bench at the start of last year. But that just shows you, it can't be good for your confidence picking the ball out of the back of the net every week. And you kind of see that in his demeanour, and I think it's playing with his mind. There was that little clip at full time where he took his gloves off and kind of stood with his hands on his hips, and it does look to be, like I say, playing on his mind. You've just wrote the line, Samuel, that he was fear for his place if going to the African Cup of Nations. We're yet to have that confirmed, whether he is going away with Cameroon. It's a real possibility, isn't it? Because although we've not saw India yet since his move from Turkey, if he comes in and does well in that period, and Onana continues to struggle until then, he might struggle to get his place back.
Well, it happened a few seasons ago when De Gea went away on paternity leave, and obviously there'd been an element of rotation with him and Dean Henderson, and Henderson was told he would be starting these 6 games, and across those games he did very well. And when De Gea was available again, because you had the issue of quarantining as well if you went away, and that would obviously delay a player's return. So that's why Henderson had 6 games. But when De Gea was back, Henderson effectively became the number 1, certainly in the Premier League. But such was Solskjaer's softness. There was an element of rotation going on, and I think he actually adjusted the pattern of rotation to ensure that De Gea would start the Europa League final, because he'd started playing in the Europa League when Henderson thought by rights he should be in the Europa League. With Bayindir, it's strange that he's not had a game yet. He should have played against Palace in the League Cup. That was a very obvious opportunity. Even if he'd have had nothing to do all evening, at least you can see how he conducts himself and what he's like with the ball at his feet, whether he's competent or not, whether he has a decent understanding with teammates. But as it stands, I think the first game he would probably play in would be in the FA Cup third round, which, it could be an easy draw, it could be a really tough draw. The first league game would be against Tottenham at home, which of course is going to be a very important fixture given how well Tottenham until recently have been doing this season. But with Onana, I can't see a scenario where he's dropped against Newcastle.
It would make the situation worse, wouldn't it, if he dropped, and that's the thing.
Ten Hag he didn't criticise him after the game. I don't think any of us really expected him to. And until that game on Wednesday night, he had a quite steady period of improvement. I think the last mistake he'd made was probably the Brentford game. And even in the Derby defeat, he was probably the only respectable performer. He made a very good save from Haaland, and he's made some other decent stops. He's had a few clean sheets. I think United haven't conceded a goal in 280 minutes in the Premier League, and of course that's a collective effort. There have been some very good defensive performances at that time, mainly from Harry Maguire, but Onana has undeniably contributed to that. So to have had this sudden start regression, it's a big issue, because I think what undermines his position now is that, the De Gea revisionism, I don't think any of us have had any time for. I've never thought it was the wrong call to.
Well, it was funny when I think the second goal went in or the third goal went in. I messaged you, obviously out in Turkey, and I said, if De Gea had been playing, they would win this game 2-3-0. But that wasn't a suggestion to say they should have kept De Gea, of course, and you knew that.
And look, it's December now, and De Gea has still not got a club either, which rather speaks volumes of his standing and how how most major football clubs look upon him now. They see him as a relic of a bygone era, which is pretty harsh, because I still think he's one of the best shot stoppers around. But he's judged on what. Keepers are judged on what they do with their feet as much with their hands these days, it feels like. But I think, as I said, going back to the point, I think Onana has already made more mistakes this season than De Gea made last season. And there were some really, really bad errors by De Gea last season. We think Brentford, Everton in the Cup, United won that game, Sevilla, West Ham. The FA Cup final winner for Milcloud Gundogan was a poor piece of keeping.
But that's why it's so frustrating, Samuel. We're sitting here 8 months after that Sevilla game, which I thought was probably the beginning of the end, effectively, of David De Gea's time. And we're sitting here discussing another goalkeeper performance letting United down in a European competition, and you need your goalkeeper to perform. They can't be committing such mistakes in massive games.
And Onana's he's not a rookie. And
27.
Yeah,
exactly.
he's 27. He's the same age Peter Schmeichel was when he went to United. It's a good age, I think, to recruit a keeper, because it would suggest that they've banked quite a lot of experience. And he was in the Barcelona academy. He's played at big clubs in Ajax and Inter Milan, Champions League semi-final and Champions League final. I think most of us agreed at the time that he was the most suitable external candidate to come in as United's new number one, even if he hadn't have played under Ten Hag at Ajax as well. I think taking that out of the equation, he'd have been a suitable option to come in and replace De Gea. And look, there was logic in going for him, but United being United, they went about it in a rather illogical way. They could have had him on a free 12 months earlier, but they didn't. They ended up spending nearly £50 million on him. And Onana has discovered very, very quickly that being the goalkeeper of Manchester United is very, very different to being the keeper at Inter Milan or Ajax. The scrutiny is probably unmatched, really, as far as the goalkeeper position at a club is concerned. And he's buckled. There have been far too many errors. And as far as the Champions League campaign goes, if United go out of it, he will have cost them. No two ways about it. As bad as some of the defending has been, the collapse against Bayern Munich was sparked by his mistake. He sparked that collapse really against Galatasaray. I know Galatasaray had equalised again, but United went down to 10 men through his back pass, and then he was far too easily beaten for the third goal. And of course, with the game in midweek, he was culpable for all three. You hope for his sake that if United get through, they can say, well, that penalty save from Jordan Larsson, look how crucial that was. And that may still turn out to be the case. But so far, his Champions League campaign has been remembered for all the wrong reasons.
That's what I was going to say. It's a shame because that fantastic penalty save, which we hoped would be the moment you kick on from, it's almost made redundant if, it is made redundant if the crash out. Regarding whether B&D can actually usurp him then in January, I guess we really don't know because we've not saw him, as you've just said, in public in a Manchester United shirt.
No.
And I don't think we're going to sit here and pretend that we're watching him in Turkey week in, week out.
Well, you look at the games coming up in December, which is always a really busy month, and United have got a free midweek by virtue of being out of the League Cup, which doesn't help really. But given that Onana started against Palace, we knew that he was going to start against Newcastle when they lost. But I think it's Newcastle, Chelsea, Bournemouth, Bayern Munich, Liverpool, West Ham.
Difficult run of fixtures,
Villa,
actually, isn't it?
Nottingham Forest. So they've got eight matches this month, and there's not an obvious one that you look there and you think, yeah, Bayern will get in for that. You're probably looking at the FA Cup third round, which would obviously be the start of this period of him playing probably 6 games in a row, provided that Onana does go on AFCON duty. I mean, the days when a reserve keeper would have a run out for the reserves or the under 23s, they seem long gone now as well. But you half wonder whether there'd be some merit in that, just to give him a game of some sorts. But I mean, the under 23 fixtures seem to always be all over the place, and they often clash with the first team as well. So that's another reason why you don't see any first teamers dropping down there anymore.
We'll leave it there then for part 1 and be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, Samuel, when the team news dropped in Turkey, were you surprised to see Sofyan Amrabat start in midfield? Because I thought, we're on about making big statements, but 18-year-old Kobbie Mainoo, he made his full Premier League debut against Everton last weekend. He was fantastic at Goodison Park, and I thought he should have started. Look, it was going to be a raucous atmosphere. It was. You can actually paint it into words what it was like to be there. But I think he offers more than Amrabat. I didn't think Amrabat did very good in the game. And when he came on, Mainoo was quite effective as well. And look, we'll look forward to the Newcastle game a bit later in this podcast, but I think he has to come back into the team for me.
I think Amrabat did okay by virtue of the team doing well. It was where they were playing well, and when he came off, they were 3-1 up as well. And I still think those changes, in particular the Marshall for Højlund change, were counterproductive. And within the 30 minutes of those changes, it was 3-3. Galatasaray had scored twice. But I mean, Ten Hag said on the Tuesday, if you're good enough, you're old enough, or words to that effect about Mainoo playing. And I think a lot of people probably assumed that Mainoo would start, but given the atmosphere and the importance of the game, I don't think it was a massive surprise that Amrabat came in. I'll be honest, when I saw the team drop, I didn't like it, really. I don't know what Anthony had done to get a recall. I don't know what Amrabat had done to get a recall. The back four was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's back four. That said, Wan-Bissaka is much better at dealing with Wilfried Zaha than Diogo Dalot is, which clearly had a bearing on that decision. And in fairness, I thought Wan-Bissaka did quite well. Anthony had one of his best games for United. He started really well, and that was probably the reason why Garnacho came off, because although it made sense to make a forward-thinking change and energise the attack, you thought, well, would you take Anthony off at that point? He was doing quite well. If it was one of the two going off, you'd say, oh, that's a bit harsh on them. And of course, it was Garnacho, and where he'd scored, maybe it was more. It got a bit more attention, and the fact that he'd obviously scored a wonder goal at the weekend. But United executed the game plan brilliantly up until the first goal went in. But it's just, I wrote it as the preview piece going into the game, that if they eradicate their mistakes, they will win this game.
But we've been saying that for weeks.
But they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't. And not just with the goalkeeping, but also their game management is flaky. There was a former colleague who said I think he tweeted Rich saying, I failed to see where there was poor game management in the first half against Copenhagen.
I don't know who tweeted Rich, but just off that comment, I know who it is.
And I'm thinking, well, there's a big hint of the 2 goals being conceded in 9 minutes after you lost a man. Other teams would handle these situations better. City would have ensured in that position Copenhagen, if they were 2-0 up, there was no way they were losing the game. They'd have got something from the game. They'd probably have still won it.
Surely the players have to take responsibility for that, though, because there is a degree on the pitch when you're 2-0 up, you've got to look around, speak to each other, communicate, and just settle down, keep the ball, retain possession, be clever with it. Yeah, and United don't tend to do that, do they? It's chaos.
And that was the compelling case to start Mainoo, because he would have kept the ball. Amrabat is not good at keeping the ball. McTominay has got many pluses, as we've seen in recent weeks. Ball retention is not one of them. And that was always going to be an issue in that stadium, because you do need to keep the ball in European football. That competition is probably the one where ball retention is of the utmost importance. There are very few coaches who will get far in this modern era by not retaining the ball or not having the players out there to do that. And when they went 2-0 up, it was as if they thought, OK, we'll sit back now and let Galatasaray have a bit of the ball, when it shouldn't be that. Galatasaray, newsflash, Galatasaray are not that good a team. They've got some really, really good individuals who can create something out of nothing. Collectively, I think they are the most unimpressive in United's group. I think Copenhagen are a better team than them. And that's why it must be so galling for United, not just the fact that they've dropped 8 points in these games, but against Galatasaray, they've taken 1 point and they've conceded 6 goals to a side that really just, their game plan seems to revolve around individual moments. And they've got quality individuals like Icardi's goal scoring record, and everyone knows he's been a good striker. Zaha was a terrific winger for Palace. Ziyech had his time in the sun with Ajax. And Ndombele, even though he's clearly unpopular in Istanbul, he has done some magnificent moments in his career, even at Tottenham, where he had a pretty tough time in his first year or so. And the more that's the maddening thing for United, that they've found it easy scoring against these teams, but they're so porous against them. And that's not just down to Onana, because in Copenhagen, they lost 4-3 and nobody was coming away from that saying, pinning the blame on Onana for that. There is a fundamental issue with their game management, and maybe Mainoo could be the one who has the transformative effect there.
We'll come on to Anthony a bit then, because as you said, he does deserve praise. Do you know who put him in his panel team ahead of the game? Did you notice?
Rich Fay, was it?
No, I did.
Oh, did you?
Which was, I expected some pelters of supporters for starting Anthony in my team. For listeners who don't know, we do a panel team where we select the players we would like to start, not the predicted team, our preferred side. And yeah, I just had a feeling, I think more Pellistri. I don't trust Pellistri. I think he's effective off the bench.
Don't think Ten Hag does.
Well, that's the thing, and he has his moments. There was someone at United at open training on Tuesday that was kind of singing Pellistri's praises, a member of staff, and saying what he can offer off the bench and stuff. But I think you're kind of clutching with straws. Look, he's a young player, don't get us wrong, but he's probably not at the level to start for Manchester United, that's fair to say. So yeah, I give Andy the nod. He delivered, to be fair to him, one of his better games. It's probably his best performance this season, actually.
It's literally his only good performance.
Well, that's the thing. And it's only fair to praise him because we have heavily criticised him.
Yeah. Absolutely. Look, when a player starts, you're not thinking, I hope he plays badly because...
You want him to do well, of course, yeah.
If he plays well, he deserves to be praised for that. And the way Anthony played is the way you would want a left-footed right wing to play. He was getting the ball higher up the pitch. He was using the ball well. His interplay was really good. He contributed to the first goal and the third goal. There was a reason why Ten Hag kept him on as well. And I think, if anything, United, during that last 20 minutes where it was just like tactical anarchy.
Basketball match at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah. If anything, they didn't maximise him enough. I mean, Dalot came on and although they left themselves a bit vulnerable to Zaha, and Zaha did have a pretty good opening where his shot was quite harmless. Dalot was getting forward quite a lot, but it felt like that Anthony was kind of getting left by the wayside when they had these counterattacks. And where we were so high up in the stadium, you could see just how much space there was there for United to exploit on these breakaways. It was like a five-side game, but with more space. And given that at the end of it, you're thinking how they only scored 3 goals in that, because they had innumerable chances. The best chances, as I said, probably came in the last 15 or 20 minutes where they hit the post. McTominay put one just past the post when he should have hit the target. Pellistri could have had a hat-trick within the first 5 minutes of coming on, and then he still had an even better chance right at the death where he's got to score that, where somehow the ball falls into his path. And looking back at that, Marshall, I'm no fan of, and I think he didn't do himself any favours in midweek. But that cross that it came from, I don't know how Dalot misses Marshall. Marshall, in fairness to him, he makes the right run near post. He's onside. If Dalot finds him, he gets a touch to it. It just probably goes in automatically. Somehow Dalot couldn't even find him, but Galatasaray, being the team that they are, they somehow bundled the ball into Pellistri's path, and Muslera in the end has to smother the ball at his feet. It was a breathtaking, and it was the craziest game I think I've been at since the Copenhagen game only 3 weeks ago, and we had a 2-week gap during that time as well for the internationals. But that is United in the Champions League this season, and in a way it's quite reassuring for the supporters that they're going to United games, they're not dreading it. It's absorbing stuff. It's great to watch. There's a real determination about them. They're playing stylish football. Some individuals are in a really good place at the moment, and the league position is looking a lot better than maybe a month ago, and they've won 5 of the last 6. I think they're actually making progressive strides. The problem is they are taking backward steps in the Champions League, and if you go out the Champions League at the group stage, questions have to be asked.
We'll also praise Garnacho there in this part. I think he's worth a mention because we've always said about him, he needs to start affecting games from the first whistle when he actually starts, makes the first team, because he's usually better from the bench. And in recent weeks, he's been brilliant. His goal against Everton, breathtaking. It was really well taken finish against Galatasaray. So we're starting to see a bit of consistency, and that's what he's always lacked. If he can produce that week on week, there is going to be a really special player there, because we know he's got a lot of talent, and it just needs to fall in place each week, doesn't it, I guess?
It clearly wasn't the obvious takeaway from it, but United didn't miss Rashford in Istanbul, and Garnacho has started, I think, the last 6 games now, all of them on the left wing. Rashford has been absent for a few of them. I think he was out of the team against Newcastle because they rotated in the League Cup, and he was injured against Fulham. Then of course he was suspended in midweek. But I thought even before the Everton won the goal, Garnacho had shown admirable traits as a starter, in that he was maturing more. In the second half at Fulham, he was quite threatening having been unthreatening in the first half. He's played in some difficult atmospheres as well, testing environments, and he's come out smelling of roses. And to have gone to Everton and scored, to have gone to Galatasaray and scored as a 19-year-old, that shows the potential. I mean, everyone knows that he's got a very high ceiling, and it's remarkable that at this stage of his career, having come to United just over 3 years ago during a pandemic, and how unsettling and how unnerving that must have been for a 16-year-old to be where he is at the moment, having achieved everything he's achieved with the Youth Cup winning team and played an FA Cup final, won the League Cup, played as many games as he has already for United. I mean, he was last season's academy legacy. This season, hopefully, it will be Kobbie Mainoo. But that's what I like about United. It feels like they are starting to get an identity back. They need to incorporate that into their Premier League games, their domestic games, because even at Everton, although the second half they were quite professional, the first half somehow they were 1-0 up at half time without creating a chance. So there's a lot of room for improvement as far as the performances are concerned in the Premier League. But if Garnacho's on the wing, Mainoo's in midfield, Fernandes is the playmaker, Højlund's up front, and if Anthony can continue playing that way, and McTominay's been on a good run of form, supporters, we're going to look forward to going to see United play. And that hasn't always been the case this season. It has been, as I said earlier, it has been a chore at times watching them. Hopefully we're coming to the end of that now, because it does feel like they are playing. I mean, Ten Hag said they play the way I like them to play, and they've not done that anywhere near enough this season. And that's what makes it so galling for United, that they're playing pretty well in European games, but in the last two, they've lost one and they've drawn the other.
Just give a few mention to a few youngsters quickly. You mentioned Garnacho, Kobbie Mainoo, Dan Goal was on the bench as well, and Joe Hugel. 4 of those players were part of that FA Youth Cup winning squad. So to see them 18 months on, part of that first team that went across to Turkey, that's fantastic.
And Mainoo did really well when he came on, I thought, very composed.
We'll leave it there for part 2, and we'll be back over for part 3. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, just going to give you a quick mention to Footballer of the Year at Reach. I believe it's done across the whole network. So you are voting for your favourite United player, Marcus Rashford, Casemiro, Mary Earps and Bruno Fernandes in the calendar year of 2023. So if you go across onto the website, vote for your favourite player. I believe they do compete against other clubs' players, and eventually someone comes out on top. Now that's done, Samuel, back to the podcast and the Newcastle preview. A massive game, as you smile there as I say that, on Saturday night. 8 p.m. at St James's Park. It's going to be electric, the atmosphere. Newcastle had PSG in midweek, 1-1 in the end in France. They were very unfortunate not to win that game. You text me when PSG were given that penalty and you said, terrible decision. I obviously said, I concur. But no, in all seriousness...
No expletives whatsoever.
In all seriousness, it is going to be a tricky match because United lost 2-0 there in April last season. There's obviously the added dynamic of that game in the Carabao Cup.
Newcastle's record against United in the league is very good since Howe came in.
Yeah, and there's that game in the Carabao Cup when Newcastle rocked up, I think, with their reserves, their second reserve team in the one. So it's not going to be straightforward. No,
it's going to be another... I mean, I think, if anything, United have maybe exceeded expectations, and these 2 test and away games have taken 4 points from them. As disappointing as the conclusion was in Istanbul, the Everton win, very good win, great, some brilliant goals, and that's the other thing at the moment. United seem to be scoring some really, really good goals, team goals, individual goals. But with Newcastle, it's another opportunity. If I think if they win at Newcastle of these three away games, that would be the statement. I think if they were to win at Newcastle, you can say that's a statement win, even if they don't play particularly well. You'd imagine they'd have shown admirable traits to have got over the line, but it's a tall order, even with the issues Newcastle have had as far as injuries in the squad and what have you. But I think, if anything, the atmosphere will be even more charged after the injustice in Paris, where it was a preposterous penalty decision. I mean, I am never one for conspiracy theories, but given that the PSG president was sat next to the UEFA president in the stands, I think Newcastle fans can be forgiven.
You just know he's a good bloke because he actually had Saudi Arabia on his right shoulder and Qatar on his left shoulder.
You can imagine. I'd be understanding if Newcastle fans would flag that and say, is there not a bit of a conflict of interest here? Should a UEFA official be watching a game of that magnitude in the company of Nasser Al Khalifi, who obviously is involved with UEFA as well, but it wasn't a good look, put it that way, after what happened in added time with that ridiculous VAR intervention, and reading the reports the next day how this guy he's really good on VAR, he's highly rated. How do you highly rate someone on VAR? Like, as we said before, a good referee is one who goes unnoticed, and unfortunately we always notice them these days. But United, their form in the Premier League is very good. They've won 5 of their last 6, and if they can build on the Everton game, and I think it's a tall order to expect another 3-0 win at Newcastle, but they do feel like they're in a better place now, even though there are bigger tests coming up. And the away form this season, they've beaten the bottom 3. They won at Fulham, who I don't know where they are now because they beat Wolves the other night, but they were 15th last weekend. They've become bottom half of the table fodder this season. United's away form is mirroring their away form last season, where they beat the bottom 6 or 7, and Wolves they didn't beat anyone away from.
Took 1 point from the top 9, which mentioned.
I think it was just Fulham, wasn't it? It was Fulham were the only team maybe who finished in the top half that they won at. So it was only 8 wins away from home in the league last season, and 6 of them were against the bottom 6, if I'm not mistaken. So they need to address that. That's why, again, it would be a statement, because they have not had a big away win for a really, really long time. The Everton win was the first 3-0 in the league since Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's last win in management at Tottenham in October 2021, and that may well be the last, inverted commas, big win they had. And Tottenham were not. That was, although it was a big game going into it, it was also Nuno Espirito Santo's last match in charge of Spurs, because he was sacked 2 days later. So there was almost like an asterisk to that victory. But it's a big challenge going to Newcastle at any time. Even when we went there, Rich and myself, for I think it must have been a 4:30 kickoff on the Sunday last season in April, and the atmosphere was terrific that day. I'd like to think it'll be even better. I mean, for the first time at a football match on Wednesday, my ears hurt from the noise from Galatasaray fans. What they did at kickoff, the choreography and the chant that just they summoned, and then the whistles when United had the ball, that was an experience unlike anything else I've ever experienced. To be fair to
the players, because we've talked about this problem at length on this podcast, where we see this group of players, this dressing room, tend to struggle in big crowds and big atmospheres. But Goodison Park aggrieved them Evertonians. Yeah, and then obviously won 3-0. They performed well in Galatasaray. Yeah. If it wasn't for Andrew Onana, we'd be talking about a fantastic victory. So there's optimism going into this game.
I think so.
It really is.
Yeah, that was the crux of my piece this morning. It was, I was really struggling for a headline on it, because it's strange. There's clearly a lot of focus on Onana, and United could go out of the Champions League, but I do genuinely believe that they are making progressive strides at the moment, and they're playing good football more often than not. They're functional and efficient in the Premier League, but they've got to use that as a building block to play as stylishly as they have been playing in the Champions League. And if they can do that against Newcastle, then I think people will start to believe that they could actually have a successful season, because a month ago, maybe even sooner, there was a danger that this season would possibly peter out long before May.
Well, it couldn't have looked much worse, I think, at that point. We'll just end with the starting lineup then. Would you make any changes? Obviously, Rashford was suspended in midweek. He missed that game in Europe. I think he'd probably return to the team for me. For all, Anthony was excellent, as we've just touched upon. He had one of his better games.
Fairness, Anthony did okay at St James's Park last season, and he seems to...
But there'll be no Dan Burn starting on
Will it be Lewis
Livermore, who's a fantastic addition to Newcastle, so that'd be a challenge. Well, obviously we've discussed Mainoo as well. I'd put him back into
Put
the team.
Mainoo in. I'd probably go with certainly Mainoo. I'd keep Anthony in with Garnacho, but Mainoo for Amrabat would be one change. I mean, I know Newcastle are very strong in midfield, and United got that balance wrong at St James's Park last season when it was Sabitzer started. I'm trying to think who else started with him, because I think Casemiro was suspended.
Started,
Might have been Sabitzer and Fred, because it wouldn't have been McTominay. So I think it probably was Sabitzer and Fred, because I think Christian Eriksen was still injured, Casemiro was suspended, and McTominay wasn't really getting a look in. It was
McTominay actually. Yeah, it's McTominay, Sabitzer, and Fernandes.
Yeah, well, I think Sabitzer and Fred would have been more balanced, but Sabitzer and McTominay, that would have been an issue. So it wasn't a surprise that United did get overrun quite often in that game. Wan-Bissaka did pretty well in the week, but I thought Dalot did decently at Everton last week. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ten Hag changes back there. And it feels also, although there was a reason of getting Dalot on to make an attack-minded change, it does feel like Wan-Bissaka, he's not played a huge amount of 90-minute games this season. I know he's out injured for a 2-month spell, but that probably comes into Ten Hag's thinking as well.
I think you'd have to start Wan-Bissaka actually when you think Anthony Gordon's probably been one of Newcastle's best players this season, and he's going to cause problems down that side. An interesting subplot to the game, obviously, if we see Kobbie Mainoo coming into the team, Newcastle will likely start Lewis Miley, who's 17 years old. So you've got 2 young English midfielders there, and that'll be really interesting dynamic in the centre of the pitch. Yeah,
absolutely, and it's good that Eddie Howe was showing faith in someone so young as well to have actually started him in the week. I mean, there was a lot made of the stats in that game because PSG had 80% possession or whatever it was, and it showed how they had all these shots to goal. But I never really got the
high XG.
Well, actually, watching the game, I didn't think that Nick Pope really needed to make it wasn't like his goal was being peppered with shots, or he was having to make stupendous save after stupendous save. I think Newcastle did a pretty good job of containing PSG, and PSG were getting quite desperate with their appeals, and so much so that a desperate appeal somehow led to a really, really ridiculous penalty award.
And we'll leave it there, Samuel. Thank you very much for your time. It should be a cracker on Saturday night.
It should be. Looking forward to it.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Check out the socials, etc. I do have to give a mention to the TikTok as usual, reluctantly. So if you're a TikTok man or woman, head across there, check it out. But have a great weekend. Thank you very much.